This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Oh boy, what a packed one we have in store for today. And I know when you look at the title right now, you're probably thinking, what do you mean packed? You've got two shows in the title you're recapping. Like, how's that a packed show? Well, bear in mind the two shows also constitute for about 5 to 6 hours worth of overall wrestling when you put it all together. Actually, more than that if you count the buy-in show and all the countdown stuff AEW did before the pay-per-view. Both of which I did not watch, and I still found myself spending most of my Sunday yesterday collecting notes and getting things ready in preparation for today's show. But that's alright, because there is plenty to talk about. And before we dive into everything, if it is your first time checking out the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast, welcome aboard and thanks for tuning in. We have two shows each week that we produce here exclusive to YouTube and Rumble. We have a Monday and Friday podcast where we cover AEW's two weekly TV shows, NWA Power, weekend pay-per-view events, wrestling article pieces, and historical classic content as part of our retro review series, which is something that we just recently launched in the last couple weeks as the replacement for the NXT coverage we used to do. If it sounds like something you'd be interested in, awesome sauce. Make sure you let me know by smashing the subscribe button and clicking the bell icon to stay pinned on both podcast uploads each week. And also, because subs don't carry a whole lot of weight with YouTube in 2021, it is also important that you guys hit the like button and leave a comment down below. And, with the material we have in store today with the Full Gear recap, this would be a great time to give me your feedback on the show. Let me know overall general consensus, highlights, lowlights, pros, cons, doesn't matter. Leave all your feedback down below for me. As it pertains to article content, I highly encourage you to stay posted for future Monday shows as we dedicate the final portion of that show to taking in-depth exclusive analyses into my personal wrestling content that I write for the Chairshot website. If you head on over to www.chairshot.com, click under the opinion tab, you will always find my work labeled under the name Star. I write opinion pieces ranging from a variety of wrestling topics, and I always make sure to leave my most recent publication in the description for you to check out. I got a big topic planned for this week, which we will be covering on Monday. Not going to spoil what it is, but I definitely encourage you to check out that show on Monday to see what we have in store. And I think that covers about all the prelim stuff. Now, before we dive into the Full Gear pay-per-view from Saturday night, I should point out that I did watch Rampage from Friday night, and I pretty much figured by the time the Monday show rolled around, Rampage was pretty much going to be old news and really not worth any kind of in-depth discussion. So I'm going to try not to spend more than a few minutes briefly touching on Rampage from Friday night. Again, the show's a complete afterthought at this point, but I figured I'd give a few quick notes since I did watch the show on Saturday morning. Bobby Fish and Jungle Boy in the opener was fine for what it needed to accomplish. Pretty much the entire match was built around Bobby working over Jungle Boy's left arm. Very simple story with, Jungle Boy working from underneath. I could tell Bobby probably helped lay out a lot of the match. And the whole afterbirth with Cole running out and doing the brief beatdown on Jungle Boy before Christian and Luchasaurus ran out and Cole basically left Bobby to be a sacrificial lamb. don't really know how I feel about that. I kind of like the story they were going with having Cole and Fish working together, especially if it was going to lead to something down the road with Cole possibly splitting from the Beta Bucks, which is exactly what needs to happen with him at this point. Now it kind of seems like they're already moving on with that, and the whole Bobby Fish thing was just an excuse to give Jungle Boy a TV match before the pay-per-view. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's what I got out of watching this. Now this could eventually lead to something down the road where once Kyle O'Reilly comes into the picture, him and Fish could immediately come in as baby faces and go after Adam Cole and the Bucks. And, you could still implement the idea of trying to figure out which side Cole's going to pick and choose at a later date. So, they still have options, but I just wasn't a big fan of Cole leaving Fish to take the bullet this early in the game. I did like the little tease they did with Adam Cole and Hangman Page backstage, and with the fallout to the pay-per-view, that should definitely be a good program if they decide they want to go down that route. Pretty much everything else on the show, I have very little input to add. The women's match involved Jade Cargill, so you pretty much know what you're getting there. Dante Martin's match featured Dante doing a lot of incredible athletic shit and continuing to exude facials like he's always on the verge of tears. I will say, though, I like the post-match angle they did with Team Taz trying to recruit Dante into their crew. Well, I'll save the discussion for a later date, but, when I do think about the possibilities of what they could do with Dante as part of Team Taz, it almost makes me kind of wish they would have just skipped over the whole Lio Rush thing entirely and just have used Team Taz as the catalyst to tease the heel turn. And, the more I think about it, I'm kind of starting to get on board with the idea of Dante eventually aligning himself with Team Taz. I think they could do a lot with that program, and it'll give Dante a chance to work with guys like Ricky Starks and Taz to get him more comfortable as a character and learn facials and how to carry himself on television. So there are a lot of possibilities that could come out of that. And Matt Hardy versus Orange Cassidy was a prime example of there's a reason that Dark Elevation exists, and at this point, anything that involves Matt Hardy, Orange Cassidy, and the Peanut Gallery should not be happening on live television. Oh, and to make matters worse, they actually put Hardy over. Because it is imperative this feud must go on. Because the fans are so invested in it. Because there's so much money to be had by continuing to drag out this program. Perhaps my sarcasm isn't coming across as I would like. So, yeah, the show is a complete waste of time. But again, thank God it was only an hour. So there's your brief 3-minute rundown of Rampage from Friday. So that brings us to Full Gear from Saturday night, and I will say this from the onset before we get into anything on the show. Off the top of my head, I don't recall the last professional wrestling pay-per-view that I was genuinely looking forward to going in. And that's not just exclusive to AEW. That's AEW, WWE, NXT, NWA, New Japan. Name the company, doesn't matter. And I even said in my preview predictions portion of the Friday show that just looking at this card on paper, it was probably AEW's strongest card they've put together since their company first started. And to really put it in perspective, I think when we go back and look through the archives of AEW years from now, and we look at where they first started as a company with that first Double or Nothing show back in May of 2019, I think it was, and we sort of look at how the roster has developed and molded into what it is now, there's definitely a lot of growth with the assembly of the roster over the last couple years. And, I don't just mean that from a size point of view, because there is an argument to be made that perhaps AEW's roster has gotten a little too sizable and bloated at this stage in the game. I'm more so referring to the actual talent accrual of guys like CM Punk and Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole, and refocusing a lot of their undercard to, phase out some of the initial goofballs they used to prominently feature, like the Joey Janela's and the Chuck Taylors and the Jimmy Havoc's and the Kip Sabians, and, trying to spotlight and focus on less of the comedy shit. And of course, we still get plenty of comedy from time to time, and, it's hit or miss with me, but generally it is not as insulting as it used to be with these shows. And, while I'm not a fan of him in particular, they have at least toned down the Orange Cassidy antics in the last year or so. So, with that all going in, I definitely had higher expectations for the show. Now, the ultimate question coming out of it was, how was I going to be able to bring a fair and balanced report to the show to sort of level out the MSNBC, CNN levels of bias from the mainstream wrestling media? And at the same time, also trying to avoid having it descend into a 30-minute tirade about all the problems AEW still has and that they need to fix. So I'm going to try to find a happy medium here. I have a lot of notes about the show, some of them good, some of them bad. My goal with this recap is to provide the most honest, upfront, and constructive opinion as I can. So, if you're expecting me to come out from the gate and give you Wrestling Observer levels of biased reporting with this whole garbage notion that this was an all-time classic and one of the best pay-per-views of all time, and every match was good to great and 4 stars and up, if you believe that, you can go stick it, because that's not what you're going to get here. By that same token, if you're an AEW hater and you just want ranting and complaining about how, WWE is the superior product and AEW is a glorified garbage indie fed with a mainstream cable television deal, well, you're not going to get that either. I'll give my overall impressions at the end, but for now, let's dive into the card and just see how in the tank every major wrestling media outlet is for AEW at this point. So our opener for the night was MJF versus Darby Allen, which was an odd choice for an opener. Speaking of odd, how about that video promo beforehand with Darby Allen basically committing attempted vehicle arson? Hope the guy in the passenger seat with the MJF mask isn't dead, otherwise Darby could be looking at a pretty substantial lawsuit and jail time. So, I said in my preview predictions part of the Friday show that if they did not try to get too cute with this match, and they didn't overcomplicate spots, it would probably end up being a hell of a match. And I guess the best and the fairest way I can sum this up is there was a mixture of both. The more and more I watch modern wrestling now, the more I really take notice of the over-exaggerated fundamentals and basics. Obviously, if you watch pro wrestling for years, you know a lot about the standard ways matches begin with, when both guys are looking to gain the offensive advantage. The whole headlock, tackle, drop-down hip toss is a standard trope for a reason, and it's because it's easy, but it's smooth. The whole thing at the beginning where they were doing the more mat-based wrestling, they were trying to wrestle and pin each other's shoulders to the mat. I'm not saying it looked phony, but there was a lot of cooperative choreography going on there for my liking. Like, the best example I could think of is the part where MJF and Darby had the fingers locked and they were doing the pin exchanges where Bryce was counting their shoulders to the mat. And the first time they did the kick out, the left shoulder goes up. And then the second time, the right shoulder goes up. And then the third time, they do the simultaneous bridge. And then MJF flips over to pin Darby's shoulders to the mat. And the first time he does it, Darby's right shoulder goes up. And then the second time, his left shoulder quickly pops up. And you can even tell MJF wasn't even struggling to keep him pinned to the mat all that much during those exchanges. It was almost like he was helping him raise his shoulders up from the mat. It all just looked very planned and choreographed for my liking. Now, is that all nitpicking? Yeah, probably. But it's nitpicking in the context that I've seen this on more than one occasion in modern wrestling, and it just bothers me when I see things that look blatantly cooperative in the business. And, I could probably go into a whole spiel about a couple other things that bothered me in this match, but I don't want to harp on the negatives for too long. The point of the rambling about the mat wrestling deal is just to debunk all this hot garbage that, all these matches were 4 stars and up, and virtually everything didn't have any problems and all this crap. Don't feed into that. All in all, though, I did like that they kept things serious here. MJF continues to exemplify why he's one of the best heels in the business today, and I honestly would not be surprised if he ends up winning that world title sometime in the next 3 to 4 months. I'm not a huge Darby Allen guy, but I will concede that he does have that sort of Jeff Hardy appeal to him where it's like every time you watch him in a match, you're thinking, what stupid stunt is he going to try and pull off here? And generally, I would say for a Darby Allen match, he didn't do anything all that dangerous or daredevilish. I think the closest thing to anything I consider high risk on Darby's part was the coffin drop he did to MJF on the outside, which didn't look all that great, if I'm going to be blunt. But I will say that Darby always plays a good babyface in peril. And if there was ever a perfect dance partner for him to work in a match like that, it was MJF. In the finishing sequence they went with here was actually pretty clever. It ended up with Wardlow and Shawn Spears trying to run down, but Sting quickly cut them off at the pass and leveled them with some chair shots. MJF ended up bringing in the skateboard to try and Kyle Rittenhouse Darby, but instead he rolled it over to Darby to try and get him to break and DQ himself. But, Darby hands the gimmick off to Remsburg, and MJF reaches in his tights and clocks Darby with the brass knuckles. And just to be a dick, he gives Darby the headlock takeover and pins him. And, I honestly should have figured out as soon as MJF cut that promo on Darby on Dynamite where he's saying, I could beat you with a headlock takeover. I'm sitting there in the back of my mind thinking, that motherfucker's going to find a way to pin Darby with a headlock takeover on this show. And sure as shit he did. So I really dug the finish they went with. Overbooked a little for an opener? Yeah, probably. But it made sense in order for them to get to the finish that they wanted. I'm just more so glad MJF went over. After the whole Jericho Inner Circle fiasco, MJF really needed a pay-per-view win. And the thing with Darby at this point, dude's kind of bulletproof with the AEW crowd. Whether or not he does a job, people are not going to turn on him. At least I don't see it happening anytime soon. He's just way too over with this audience for them to give him the Cody Rhodes treatment. So, Darby losing here, I don't see it hurting him. Yes, there were some split crowd chants going on here, which is a little bizarre if you think about it, but like I said, Darby could take this loss and not suffer anything for it in the long haul. So, generally, I would say solid opener. 4 stars, fuck no. But a good opener for the show, sure, absolutely. Soon we get our second match for the night. It's FTR versus the Lucha Bros for the AEW tag belts, with the fundamental premise going in for me being, are FTR talented enough to actually get something resembling an actual pro wrestling tag match out of the Lucha Bros for a change? And by that, I mean a Lucha Bros tag match where they actually bother to work within the rules and standards of American tag team wrestling, and not the kind of bullshit role they have in matches in Mexico where tag matches are essentially just everyone do whatever the fuck you want and who cares about rules. Well, the answer to that question is, it depends on what part of the match you're referring to. But on a whole, the answer was no. And of course, they assigned Rick Knox to call this match, the worst goddamn official they have on the roster. Not that I'm a big fan of Bryce Remsburg either, but my issues with him have less to do with his actual officiating and more so the fact that he would probably benefit from taking some testosterone supplements every day. Anyway, I don't know. I'm honestly trying to come up with the words to just label my overall consensus with this match. It was a Lucha Bros match. And honestly, that's probably the most accurate way I could describe it. They can do a lot of impressive stuff athletically, but I absolutely hate watching their matches because, with very, very few exceptions, they have zero concept as to how to work a tag match. Every Lucha Bros match I see, it's the same thing every time. Partners not tagging in and out, randomly running in to do 3 or 4 double team moves in a row while the ref just incompetently stands there beating off. Or, in the case of Aubrey, just incompetently standing there. Random flip dives that either the camera totally misses or just make no sense in the flow of the match. And about 7 or 8 different points where Penta showboats to the crowd to do the stupid Cerro Miedo shtick that honestly got old after watching him do it in Impact Wrestling 4 years ago. Oh, and something else I learned in this match. Phoenix and Pentagon can do a lot of crazy athletic shit, but Penta's snap suplex skills, abysmal. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't like this match. Way too many kickouts and near falls, way too much to keep track of. Complete sheer referee incompetence when it comes to actually knowing how to call tag team rules. Again, man, it was a Lucha Bros tag match. It was every Lucha Bros tag match I've ever seen. No effort to work any semblance of tag wrestling. Way too many contrived looking spots. And to top it off, the icing on the cake, if you will, a shitty finish. I love me some FTR, man, but even those guys are completely incapable of covering up for the Lucha Bro shenanigans. And I get the whole point of wanting to protect FTR by having Cash get pinned even though he wasn't the legal partner, but it's like, again, there was such little effort to actually follow any semblance of tag rules throughout the match anyway. It's like, what the hell difference does it make whether or not Cash was the legal man? Honestly, to tell you the truth, the only reason I knew that Dax was the legal guy was that a little before Cash went under the ring to pull out the Ninja Turtle mask, the Lucha Bros attempted some kind of double team pin spot where Phoenix was cradling Cash, but Knox didn't get down to count the pin and instead just kind of stood around waiting for Pentagon to jump on Dax to pin him, because those guys were the legal competitors at the time. Again, just total ineptitude. In a match that was far from being anything closely resembling 4 stars in my book. I'd be hesitant to give this anything other than 1 if I actually bought into the rating system. But that's just my opinion. What do I know? So then we get the finals of this World Title Eliminator Tournament with Miro taking on Bryan Danielson. And of course, I think by now we know the story regarding the whole Jon Moxley situation, so I'm not going to harp on that too much. That said, I can tell you that I much prefer Miro in this match over the initial idea of where they were going in this tournament. Miro has been a total breath of fresh air in AEW since he turned heel and they started running with the whole Redeemer gimmick. He was easily the best TNT champion we've seen, and while I think it was a mistake taking the belt off of him, putting him in this replacement spot and giving him a big pay-per-view payout here with Danielson was definitely the right call. For me, aside from the conclusion of the main event, this was my favorite match of the night. It was a total stark contrast with the first 2 matches, but, as an overall match layout, this was damn near perfect when it comes to bell-to-bell action. And, of course, it helps that you have 2 experienced guys in there that know what the fuck they're doing, but, that's beside the point. The other thing I really liked about this match is that it was a different kind of Bryan Danielson match that we really haven't seen from him in AEW as of late. Up until this point, he really hasn't been in the ring with too many big guys, so to speak. He's been in there with guys like Dustin and Kingston, who are bigger guys in the sense that they're tall and they have a little bit more body mass to them. But like when it comes to overall beefy, bulkier guys, Danielson hasn't really worked that style in AEW yet. And in a lot of cases, those are usually the matches that he excelled at the most, especially when he was working for WWE. You know, those matches he had with guys like Bray Wyatt and Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns, where, you know, he was mostly working from underneath the entire time, those were probably among his best matches and most memorable matches as far as I'm concerned. So I thought Miro was the perfect dance partner for him here. And definitely a lot different than the kind of match he probably would have had with a guy like Moxley if things would have, you know, worked out as initially planned. I love Miro's facials. I love the way he carries himself. Again, I think I've said it before. Like, the guy just gets it. He knows how to be a natural ass-kicking monster heel. You know, and Brian working as an underdog throughout, you know, doing his job selling and selling, just made for an all-around, well-put-together match. The finish was scary as fuck, and still not exactly sure what the intentions were with that whole top rope DDT thing, but I'll chuck it up to thank God no one died. And I guess we can thank Miro's omniscient redeemer for that. And I will say that at the point Danielson won the match, I wasn't all that surprised, although it did get me to start contemplating how I thought the main event was going to turn out. There's still a part of me that kind of wish Miro would have won this match, you know, just with how much of a role he's been on since the whole Redeemer shtick. And, you know, if you actually go back and watch the match, there were points here where the crowd were sort of split between the Miro and Bryan chants. I mean, I don't really know if that means a whole lot at the moment, but I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that Miro got over with the crowd in mass consumption. You know, of course, the first go-around, one company did everything they could to possibly sabotage it. It would be interesting to see how AEW would run with Miro if he actually started getting over to a similar babyface level there he was in, like, whenever it was, 2017, 2018, around that time frame. But, yeah, like I said, man, excellent match. And, like, as an overall structure of a match from beginning to end, definitely my favorite match of the night. So then we had this Falls Count Anywhere 6-man tag with the Beta Bucks and Adam Cole taking on Jurassic Express and Christian Cage. I actually got a laugh out of something JR said regarding Christian when he came out. He goes, "Christian always looks mad." To which my knee-jerk smartass response was something to the extent of, "Yeah, I'd probably be mad too if I was working for AEW and got saddled in a program with the fucking Bucks of Suctitude." Well, I'll say this from the outskirt. I pretty much should have known what I was in for when the Beta Bucks came out sporting the purple head and facial hair. God, I can only imagine what their wives are probably thinking as they're reading over the divorce papers. And again, you know, if you watch my preview, you'll pretty much know that I made sure to set the bar relatively low going in. A, because it was a gimmick match where plunder was going to be involved, and B, because the Bucks were in it. And for me, the first time I ever experience a good Young Bucks match, it'll probably be the last time I experience a good Young Bucks match. I think the real question going in was, how ludicrous were they going to get with the spots and near falls in this car wreck environment? Well, they sure didn't shy away from ludicrous, I'll give them that. I really don't even know where to start with this one. I mean, I could give you the Cliff's Notes version of it and say they hit each other with a bunch of shit and it went far too long, but I guess that wouldn't be doing it justice. I could point out some of the lowlights if I wanted to. An example of which being a spot where the heels just shoved a bunch of thumbtacks in Jungle Boy's mouth while Cole had him in the camel clutch. You know, and of course they do the Bucks super kick spot, and pretty much afterwards, Jungle Boy was pretty much none the worse for wear. It was like no fake blood pouch gimmick or anything. And we also had a totally preposterous deal at the end where Cole breaks out the bag with a thumbtack knee pad so they can do the BTE trigger to the baby faces. A spot that you would think would be designed to lead to the finish. Well, in the case of Get Your Shit in Wrestling, it was just another spot that happened. And I mean, I know I joked about it a minute ago with the whole fact of everyone just hitting each other with furniture and doing a bunch of reckless abandonment ECW hardcore garbage for 20 plus minutes. That's exactly what it was. There was no coherence to this match. There was no effort to do anything resembling pro wrestling. It was a 20-minute showcase of can you top this, where I was ultimately waiting for someone to either die or get severely hurt. By the grace of God, no one died, and I mean, it would appear that coming out of the show, no one was severely hurt, but I just can't get into this kind of wrestling. The crash dummy hardcore bump fest matches have been done to death. There was nothing new or innovative that anyone did here that I would consider worth checking out, and generally these matches just aren't for me, and they never have been. The best part of the match for me was the finish, where Christian had one of the Bucks pinned on the stage to do the concerto, and they had a really nice visual camera shot where they teased the idea that Christian was going to turn on Jungle Boy, because like in the frame, Jungle Boy was standing a little bit behind Christian, so it kind of looked like as he was looking over his shoulder that there was the possibility that he was going to crack him in the head with the chair, but instead he handed the chair off to Jungle Boy so he could finish the deal and get the win for his team. And whether or not that was the intended swerve, I did like that little plot element. Because while I will say I was never really expecting the heel turn from Christian going in, it does make sense, though, when you think about the story they've been playing up. And, people were speculating as to whether or not he was going to turn in the match at some point. So that was well done. Everything else in the match was exactly what I anticipated it would be going in. If you like this kind of wrestling, congrats. You probably thought I was great. It's just not my flavor. And again, JR, the absolute epitome of ironic subtlety after the match ends, goes, "Congrats to everyone involved in that situation." A situation, huh? That is a way to put it. So, after that sheer and total calamity of backyard wrestling brought to you on live pay-per-view for a $50 service charge, we get this Andrade El Idolo Malachi Black versus Pac Cody Rhodes match, or as I refer to it in my notes here, NXT 3.0 with Cody Rhodes just sort of in the periphery. It is actually kind of weird to think that 3 of the 4 guys in this match were sort of NXT's poster guys at one point when they were the top champions. Like 3 guys that you at least figured were going to be much bigger stars than they ended up being on the main roster. And, well, it definitely indicated just how Hunter and Vince were on completely different pages, and probably still are to this day. And, for a good chunk of the match, the story was mostly built around the idea of both teams not really getting along, which I guess is the story they wanted us to figure going in, but I'm not really sure how the build-up reflected that. Like, there really wasn't any animosity or dissension from any team prior to the pay-per-view. In fact, I thought one of the stories they were running with going in was trying to figure out the whole rationale for the Malachi-Andrade alliance, which, I mean, they never really explained that to begin with. And yeah, Cody and Pac, while I wouldn't say they've been particularly buddy-buddy this whole time, it's not like they've been at each other's throats or bickering on camera before the match. So I really didn't understand that whole deal. And as far as action goes, honestly, I didn't write a whole lot down. Fans booed Cody, which wasn't all that surprising. Pretty much anything Cody did offensively in this match, the crowd hated. Aside from the blind tags and Cody and Pac bickering back and forth for a lot of it, the only notable spot I really took note of was the point at the end where Black pulled Cody in the way, so Pac ended up inadvertently hitting him with one of those top rope plancha dives. I guess the finish was a little shocking in the sense that, Pac was the one that got the pin on Andrade after hitting the Black Arrow. I mean, I kind of figured Pac was in this match to take the fall, but, he ended up being the one to get the pin. I mean, perhaps as a way to make sure Cody still goes over in the end, but doesn't end up pissing off the crowd by being the guy to get the pin. I have no idea. Would I have put the baby faces over in this match? No, probably not. I mean, I think Malachi and Andrade need the pay-per-view win more than Pac and Cody. And if the feud's going to continue, I'm not really sure what putting the faces over really accomplishes. I also didn't understand the whole post-match deal with FTR running out and trying to attack Pac and Cody, only for them to immediately retreat to the back before anything substantial could happen. Are we to presume that this feud with Black and Andrade is over and Pac and Cody are now just going to do a makeshift team going after FTR? Okay. Why exactly? I guess we leave it up to our sagacious redeemer and booking virtuoso Tony Khan to write that script. For he knows all and does no wrong. Am I missing anything here? For my money, this barely would have been an above-average TV main event, much less a pay-per-view match. Just an easy 20 minutes of programming that they could have shaved off the show entirely, and honestly, I don't think it made a lick of difference. Well, I'll at least give it this. It was certainly better than this Britt Baker-Ty Conti women's title match. Oof. Not good. And, I know I didn't spend too much time talking about this in the preview on Friday, but aside from me just generally not caring about this match, I honestly, for the life of me, do not get what people see in Ty Conti that I'm not seeing. She's not bad, but God, I hear so many people saying that she was a total missed opportunity in WWE and they should have done more with her. They could have made a star out of her, blah, blah. I'm okay, if you say so. But this was the first singles match I've seen from Conti in a while, and maybe she's drastically improved over the last couple years. Who really knows? But I wasn't all that impressed with what I saw. I'm more or less trying to figure out where I stand with Britt Baker right about now. I guess the best way I can describe everything I watch in a Britt Baker match at this point, it is something to the effect of the following. She tries a lot of stuff, and about 50% of it works and looks fine, and the other 50% just doesn't look good at all. Her basics are still relatively atrocious, but she usually is able to mask a lot of it by just being a natural character on camera. So for that, I got to at least give her credit, because I know she's worked really hard, in the last couple years to get better at promos and just be a personality on screen. In that, she's excelled at tenfold. They did do a lot of smoke and mirrors stuff in this match with having Rebel and Jamie Hayter run interference behind the ref's back. So I guess Tony Khan banning people from ringside to prevent interference is only valid on television, but not so much pay-per-view. I guess that makes sense. And by that, I mean, it makes no sense. I did cringe at the point where Ty went up to do that moonsault onto all three girls on the outside. And not only did I cringe because I could totally tell Conti was petrified to do this spot, which begs the question of why do the fucking spot then? But I also cringed because of the way she came down on the heel's knees first. I immediately had flashbacks to TNA years ago with the whole broken neck deal with Jesse Sorensen, a move that was done in very similar fashion as this. Luckily, nothing tragic happened here. And I guess the story at the end was Britt wanted to try and beat Ty with the lockjaw, but couldn't get it fully applied, so she ended up just winning with a cradle in the end. Okay, I'm not really sure why they felt the need to protect Ty Conti in that way, but whatever. It was not a horrific match or anything, but it was a nice cleansing reminder to anyone that buys into the propaganda that all matches on the show were 4 stars and up. I present to you Britt Baker versus Ty Conti. So then we get the match that I was looking forward to the most going in. That was the Eddie Kingston CM Punk match. And to tell you the truth, with the way the show is going up until this point, I really need something to restore my energy. I appreciated the MMA shorts that Punk came out here with, although I think a lot of us would like to forget about anything remotely involving CM Punk and or mixed martial arts at this stage in the game. And I dug the whole way they kickstarted things here with Eddie giving Punk the back fist before the bell and knocking him flat on his face. I was genuinely hoping that they were actually going to go through with my idea of doing the no contest finish, but the almighty Lord and Savior Tony Khan had other ideas, I guess. By the way, how about those CM Punk boos, right? I mean, we all knew the nostalgia would wear off eventually, right? And actually, it was weird because when you go back and watch the match in its entirety, well, I wouldn't necessarily make the case that Punk was outright heeled during this match, because there were definitely split chants throughout various portions of the match. You could definitely tell the people were favoring Eddie more here, especially as the match rolled along. That was just very bizarre. I liked the bit of color they added with Punk taking the bump off the post. Although I will concede that looking back at the show, there probably was a little too much gigging throughout the show for my liking. I think that if they were going to have a match that included juice, Punk versus Kingston should have been it. Would have made for a more standout match. The whole John Cena troll job with Punk doing the shoulder tackles and the spinning backdrop and the 5-knuckle shuffle tees. Why? Just why? You already got a split crowd, Punk. You don't need to give people more of a reason to boo your ass. But, aside from the match being built around the whole back and forth slugfest deal, they managed to actually pack a whole lot into that short window they had to work with. And at the end of the day, that's probably why I would say that while I wouldn't put this on my match of the year list or anything, I appreciated the way they laid the match out. They didn't get overly mawkish with all the false finishes, of which there were already way too many on the show to begin with. They didn't overcomplicate spots, and they didn't do reckless, dangerous shit for the sake of doing reckless, dangerous shit. They went in there with the story of, we're going to have a knockdown, drag-out fight, and that's exactly what we delivered. The match never dragged, it never got repetitive, and for my money, both guys looked great coming out of it. I still would have preferred some kind of no contest, double DQ, double knockout kind of finish in a way to protect both guys and keep the program going forward, but I won't belittle what they did here. And I did like the fact that Kingston refused the handshake at the end and walked out of the ring after he got back on his feet. I don't really know if their idea is to eventually run with Kingston as a heel. Right now it's kind of hard to even tease that with the way the crowd's been cheering him. But, if they are looking for someone to fill that Austin tweener role as much as I hate the concept of the whole term tweener, Eddie is not a bad choice to fill that position. And while I can't say for certain, it's evident that this was a one-and-done blow-off and now these guys are going to go their own separate paths, Punk going over clean does make me wonder, if there really is any room for growth in the program like this at this point. So I'm a little iffy still on the finish, but as a match, definitely good stuff. Semi-main for the night was the Minneapolis street fight with the Inner Circle Pizza taking on America's Top Team. Of course, Dan Lambert coming out in that totally obnoxious blue Jolly Rancher colored sweatsuit. Looked like a total dweeb. And we were off to a lovely start in this 10-man street fight where, in a tag match where there are no DQs and no countouts, a rare instance in an AEW tag match where it would actually make sense to work the match with tornadoes and no tags, what do they do? Well, they utilized tags in the match. Just when you think AEW couldn't get any more illogical. And, then of course they break out all the plunder and then everyone just decides, all right, fuck it. Everyone go do whatever you want. I pretty much said that as long as Lambert was the one that got beaten in the end, I honestly could have cared less about anything else that happened in this match. And, if you copy and paste a lot of my thoughts from the 6-man earlier, you could apply a lot of it to this match, at least as far as the whole use of the plunder goes. They did break out the use of more ridiculous weaponry here, like the toaster and the fucking Prince symbol. I get where they were going with all this, but it was still a little too on the nose for me. Of course, the real notable spot in this match was the whole deal ringside where Baron Von Raschke put Ethan Page in the claw. Oh boy, Baron Von Raschke. Can't wait until we get to talking about some of his segments in the NWA WCW Retro Review Series shows. And believe me, for the time being, that is all you need to know. See what I did there? It's funny, laugh. We did have one let's see if I can do this really ridiculous death-defying spot and survive it moment where Sammy did the senton off the top of the ladder, which really was just him doing a front fall off the ladder to Scorpio through a table. You'll be happy to know Sammy lived after taking this bump. And of course the whole payoff at the end was Lambert finding himself in the ring alone with Jericho. They did a horrific looking spot where Jericho jumped onto the ropes with the idea, I think, being him teasing the lion salt, but in actuality, Junior Dos Santos was supposed to be there to cut him off, and it ended up turning into Jericho just sort of leaning over the ropes. And I think you could actually audibly hear him going, Junior! Junior! So that looked horrible. But, Lambert tried for the wall. Jericho clocked Lambert in the head with a kendo stick and started wailing away on him. Lambert took some of the most hideous bumps you could possibly imagine, which works, but it was funny to look at. He ended up doing the Eddie Guerrero tribute with the frog splash from the top and got the pin on Lambert in the middle of the ring to seal the deal. It was a rather fitting but kind of somber way to end the match. And there were a lot of Eddie tributes on the show at various points during the matches, and it is crazy to think that we have now reached the 16-year anniversary of Eddie's death. Again, man, time flies. Yeah, I honestly could still remember watching those old Eddie tribute shows back in the day and just still being in total shock as to how sudden everything came together. And it is hard going back and reading about Eddie's past just because all the kind of hell he put his body through and how bad his health was, even to the point when he first signed with the WWF. You factor in how Eddie's death and a couple years later how Benoit's death kind of forced WWE's hand to really rethink the way that they evaluated wrestlers for concussions and coordinated drug tests and just that overall deal. It is surreal. And I know for a guy like Jericho, the Eddie thing was pretty hard for him there at the end. So, yeah. It was a good conclusion. I think we're all ready for this feud to be over, and truthfully, I don't see where you go with this program at this point. I would say you got to move these teams on from now. So, we'll see where they go. By far, the point of the show that put the biggest smile on my face was the announcement of AEW's newest acquisition, Jay Lethal. And, I could honestly go into a 20-minute discussion about Lethal if I wanted to, but, I think something we sometimes forget as wrestling fans is just how over Jay Lethal was at one point years ago. When you go back to that period around the mid-2000s, even as late as 2010 when they were having Lethal go in there toe-to-toe with guys like Ric Flair on the stick, that dude was fucking over like crazy. I had actually believed at one point, especially when they sort of ditched the Black Machismo shtick in TNA and send him out there to do more serious programs with guys like Flair and AJ and Kurt Angle. I honestly had figured that they were going to put the world title on the guy at some point. And, if there ever was a point for Lethal to become world champion, that period between, say, 2007, 2008, up until like the early 2010s, that was the time to do it. And for the life of me, I will never know why the decision was never made to run with Lethal as the world champion for a period of time. Of course, when we're talking about TNA or Impact Wrestling, I can't really explain why they did a lot of stupid things they did throughout their company history, but not putting the title on Jay Lethal, that one's up there. And same goes for them never putting the strap on someone like the Pope either. Never forgave TNA for that shit. And I know Jay Lethal ended up finding a lot of success in Ring of Honor several years later as the world champion, but for me, it was just never the same. And obviously with the whole ROH situation right now, I was kind of hoping a guy like Lethal would come out of it smelling like roses with potential options and doors open for him to pick and choose where he wanted to sign with. I've always been a big Jay Lethal fan, though, and I do think that he is a huge grab for AEW. I hate that he's going to be used as fodder in his first match against Sammy Guevara for the TNT title, but what can you do? And that brings us to the main event. For the AEW World's title, it is Hangman Adam Page versus Kenny Omega, with one of the best opening pre-tapes I think I've ever seen AEW do, involving Page riding his horse through the streets of downtown Minneapolis to the Target Center. And they have all the billboards showing Page's big defeats over the last couple years. I think you can audibly hear Kenny Omega in the background going, "Good job, Hanger. I'm proud of you." The fucking tumbleweed rolling on the streets. I honestly thought that was the funniest thing on the show by far. The whole thing was hokey, yes, but it was very well filmed. And, again, I could once again take a shot at Tony Khan here for the same deal of banning guys from ringside on the TV show, yet when you have the perfect opportunity to ban people from ringside on a pay-per-view when a match has such high stakes as this one, well, of course, you got Don Callis out there allowed to run interference ringside the entire time. And, of course, he did exactly what you anticipated he would do. In the entire match, he's trying to run interference. Good call, Tony. All joking aside, though, I do want to clarify something I said during the Miro-Danielson match. I think I still stand by what I said, that when it comes from bell-to-bell layout, I'd probably say that the Miro-Danielson match was my favorite match of the night. However, when it comes to story drama, and when it comes to, like, edge-of-your-seat eagerness, I would probably still rank this above the Miro-Danielson match, just based on overall storytelling. Obviously this one has 2 years of history behind it, so it probably makes sense that a lot of the drama in this match stems from the anticipation of seeing Hangman Page finally become the world champion and, win the big one, so to speak. And while I wouldn't say that I've been the biggest fan of how they've gone about booking Page since his return following the whole Mass Elite beatdown that put him on the shelf for a period of time, I can't deny the fact that this does have a lot of layered story to it. And when you look back through the time machine of where Hangman Page started and where he is in November of 2021, if you were going to strike while the iron was hot, this was the point to do it. At no point prior to this show, nor at any point after this show, was Hangman Page going to be more over in his career than he was at this very stage. So, while I could still make a case for Omega finding a way to walk out with the strap, if you were going to capitalize on the momentum Page has been on, this was the point to do it. The people wanted it, the story made sense, and while you could have hypothetically done a swerve, this wasn't the time and place to do it. As far as action goes, I probably would have placed it right at the threshold of almost surpassing the too much mark. But I think given the story, and given the fact that there was a lot of emotion riding on this match, the false finishes and the multiple near falls were warranted here. As was the ref bump at the end. It did kind of have elements of that old school NWA style main event, with a lot of the smoke and mirrors deception and trying to really milk the big finish, keep the fans on the edge of their seats through the whole thing. And if this was the only match on the show where we saw this kind of stuff, instead of virtually every other fucking match on the show where they were doing the exact same kind of thing, it probably would have felt more impactful. But when you got 75 to 80% of the other matches on the show doing a bunch of near falls and smoke and mirrors garbage up your ass and out your ear holes, it just didn't really stand out among the pack. And that's more of an agenting problem than it is a storyline problem. And obviously if you've watched my AEW recaps before, you know that I'm not the biggest Kenny Omega fan in the world. But I'm also not completely biased against him either. When he puts on good showcases, I make sure I point them out. His TV match with Danielson is still probably my favorite AEW match of the year so far, and an easy second to that would be this match that he had with Hangman Page on this show. It's just, I don't know, it's almost kind of comedic when you think about it, but like, when Kenny plays it straight, and he doesn't get involved with all the goofy antics, he's enjoyable. And he actually can be a really good heel. I wish we didn't see that in moderation and we just saw this version of Kenny Omega all the time. I mean, it would have made his heel world championship run feel a lot more pleasing, I guess. And the whole thing with the Bucks coming out at the end and teasing the idea of fucking over Page, but, instead watch him as he gives Omega the 2 buckshot lariats from both sides of the ring. I mean, it makes sense. They've always had an allegiance to Kenny, but you always know that they still have that modicum of respect for Page, and, with all he's been through the last couple years, you could probably tell deep down they really wanted Page to have this moment. I mean, it was easily the best thing I've seen the Beta Bucks do on camera in God knows how long. Mostly because they managed to act like normal human beings for a change, even though they look like complete goofballs with that stupid fucking suspect hair dye. But it was a big moment for Hangman. When the crowd went crazy for the finish, the heels pretty much disappeared right afterwards and let Page have his big celebratory moment. Of course, the job order had to come out at the end, but I think in a rare instance where the Dark Order was actually tolerable on camera for a change, they hoisted Page up onto their shoulders and they did the big feel-good embrace. It was a very fitting ending to the show. Oh yeah, and Colt Cabana was there.
Hey, Colt Cabana, how you doing?
So now comes my overall thoughts part of the show. And again, I'm trying to be a filter for the biased media outlets, but also trying to ensure that I'm being fair and partial here with my judgment. There was a lot of good stuff on this show. I would probably throw the Miro Danielson and Omega Page match somewhere in my top 20 for the matches of the year. I'm not particularly sure where I'd rank them at the moment, but they're somewhere on there. I liked the Kingston Punk match, although I was probably expecting a little more than what we got. And I liked a lot of elements of the opener with MJF and Darby. I hated the tag title match. The street fight and the falls count anywhere matches are just not my flavor of wrestling. And the women's match was passable per women's match standards in AEW, but certainly nothing blow away. The show was a little long for my liking, although I wouldn't say it dragged at any point. And I can't say the same for a lot of WWE shows I've seen. Where once they start approaching that 5 to 6 hour mark, and the problem with WWE in particular is the fact that, when you start getting into those longer shows, in every match feels virtually the same, it does make it hard to stay invested that entire time. And that is a thing that I definitely appreciate that AEW tries to do, is operate with the vision of trying to give fans a little bit of everything when it comes to styles and match types. Even if I hate the hardcore furniture matches and I think they've been done to death, there are still big portions of the AEW fans that genuinely enjoy these matches, and good for them. The one thing that drove me absolutely nuts on this show was the over accentuation and overbearingness of a lot of the false finishes and kickouts. And I think a lot of that results from the fact that, with the exception of the Punk Kingston match, every other match on the show was either 15 minutes or longer. And this is something that AEW needs to address in the future. Not every god-blessed match you do needs to have 1,500 kickouts and near falls. Not every pay-per-view match needs to have WrestleMania oh shit moments. Not every pay-per-view match you have needs to go more than 15. Especially for the matches when they're not warranted, like the women's match or the tag title match. You want to do 1 or 2 matches on the show like that, fine. But when you start getting into where you got 6 or 7 matches where everyone's kicking out of everything and everyone's trying to play the game of can you top this, and it's spot, oh shit moment, lather, rinse, repeat, it's overkill. And I think that's what hurt a lot of the show for me, is like overall enjoyment goes. Just how overbearing and overly complex a lot of the layouts of these matches were. Like I said, I liked a lot of the show, but I'm not going to sit here and insult your intelligence. I'm not going to outright lie to you and say this was one of the best professional wrestling pay-per-views of all time. To me, for someone that's not professionally involved in the wrestling media in terms of making income out of it, shame on the media platforms like the Wrestling Observer for trying to pump up all this propagandist bullshit that this was on par with some of the greatest professional wrestling pay-per-views of all time. Get your fucking heads out of AEW's ass and quit insulting people's intelligence. I'm not trying to come off with the intentional go against the grain counterintuitive narrative for the sake of being different. I'm telling you that as someone that has watched professional wrestling for 25 plus years, as someone that has actually experienced and lived through some of the greatest periods of wrestling, and as someone who's actually seen a handful of all-time classic pay-per-views, not just from like an entertainment standpoint, but from a box office standpoint, a supplemental economic growth perspective, to try and ram down this pro-AEW biased agenda that Full Gear 2021 ranks above the greatest professional wrestling pay-per-views, not just in the modern era, but of all time, get the fuck out of here. You want to say this was AEW's best pay-per-view of all time? All right, fine. We can have that discussion. You want to even say this is one of the better professional wrestling pay-per-views we've seen in the last decade? All right, you're pushing your luck, but we can at least entertain that thought momentarily. But saying this was on par with a WrestleMania 3, or WrestleMania 10, a WrestleMania 15, God, if we even want to go there, or WrestleMania 17, as much as I hate that show, better than the inaugural Royal Rumble and SummerSlam and Survivor Series events for the WWF that established the landmark Big Four events with the inclusion of WrestleMania, greater than the Great American Bash 89, or something that even left as big a mark in the business as something like Bash at the Beach 96, that became one of the biggest turning points in professional wrestling history. Better than some of those old Clash of the Champions events in 88 and 89. You're saying that this pay-per-view ranks above all or any of those? Or ranks among those? Come on, people. I mean, I know we all pine for the days professional wrestling can be as big as it was 30 plus years ago, but let's not pretend we can rewrite history here. Yeah, and I know for a guy like Dave Meltzer, it's hard to think back to some of those more legendary wrestling pay-per-view events, especially the ones that left milestones and long-term benefits for the future of the business, but he's not pulling the wool over my eyes with this AEW agenda. Y'all want to hop aboard the AEW bandwagon and feed into the puffery, be my guest. But I try to watch this product through the lens of reality. And the reality is that anyone believes this pay-per-view is an all-time great is a damn fool. And very misinformed. That said, let's cool the waters for a little bit here. Let's take a few minutes to recap part 2 of this NWA By Any Means Necessary show from this past week. And whereas last week featured a lot more of the prelim stuff, this was the week that we got the big featured matches for the show, including the big cage match showdown between Crimson and Jax Dane that they've actually been hyping for what seems like forever. And they did briefly open the show with Crimson talking with Kyle Davis and going over the importance of the main event. He also had his son with him to, his rationale for having his son with him is so that he could learn a valuable lesson on taking accountability. Crimson's a good father. Son, I'm gonna beat this man's ass inside this cage. One day, you'll probably find yourself needing to settle a score with a bully at skull inside of a steel cage too. So I want you to take notes. And, suffice it to say, whatever notes Crimson's son took, I hope it was on the proper way to utilize rubbing alcohol and white cocaine powder, but we'll get to that in a little while. So the opening match for the show was Tim Storm facing Jaden Roller in a no DQ match. And I have no idea who Jaden Roller is. I have no idea when he started feuding with Tim Storm on this program, and I have no idea why Jaden wanted a no DQ match with him. But they had the match, and well, it was kind of a thing that happened. I guess I should mention here, as was my major complaint with part 1 of the show from last week, they stuck Austin Idol on commentary with Joe Galley and Velvet Sky, and it was ear-piercingly horrible in every conceivable way imaginable. And I guess I should have figured he would be going into this show to do commentary as well. It didn't make it any easier to sit through. We did have a point in this match where Austin welcomed Velvet to join his wrestling school. I think we're long past the point of return on that one, Austin. Good effort, though. Tim won with the DDT onto a chair, and that's about all I have to report on that one. By the way, people, just for the sake of pointing it out, Tim Storm is 56 years old, still looks in phenomenal shape, and is still wrestling because he knows how to safely work and keep his body going. Smart man. Up next was Kenzie Page versus Camille for the women's title, 2 out of 3 falls. Again, I'm not really sure what the whole point of Kenzie getting a title shot here was when they've been running with the story of having Melina chase the title, but as a match, I'd say it was fine. It was certainly more enjoyable than the Britt Baker-Ty Conti match, and I think more of that had to do with the fact that they mostly just kept things basic here and didn't try to get too flashy with all the WrestleMania false finishes. For the most part, Kenzie worked from underneath. She did get a couple flash pins here and there, but they ended up going with Camille getting the 2 straight falls, which I do always appreciate when companies do these kinds of matches. You don't always need to go with the formulaic 50-50 trade back and forth wins, and especially with how overprotective they are of Camille right now. I think it'll definitely have more impact when she does eventually take the fall at a later date, whether or not she ends up dropping the strap to Melina or someone else down the pike. So I like that attention to detail. Not much else to really say about the match other than that. They did a post-match deal that led into the next segment with Chris Adonis and Tom Latimer coming out with a cake to celebrate Camille's birthday. And, they took a few minutes to get some heat with Tom getting on the stick and telling the crowd he wants him to sing happy birthday to Camille on the count of 3. And, of course, they all oblige because it's modern wrestling fans where they rarely boo and disown the heel. So they get a few lines into actually singing along, and Tom just goes, shut up, which I got a kick out of. But then Tom calls in Kyle Davis to get on his knees and sing happy birthday, which was Not quite in key.
Not quite my tempo.
Yeah, that too. And this whole Kyle Davis humiliation led to Nick Aldis and Trevor Murdoch making their ways out for this tag match with Strictly Business. And a lot of the story of this match was centered around Nick trying to get in there with Tom to settle the score from the Strictly Business betrayal a few weeks back when Tom dropped Aldis on a chair with a couple pile drivers and put him on the shelf, which, according to Joe Galley, put Aldis on the shelf for months. Months, you say? It was like 2 weeks, people, if that. That said, it actually ended up being a hell of a little tag match, all things considered. Camille got ejected early on when she tried to run interference, which did lead to a totally disastrous ending, which I'll cover in a bit. But for like 75% of it, it was a lot of fun. Aldis and Murdoch were a great effective babyface team. Aldis ended up getting the big hot tag at the end and running wild. We did get a lot of back and forth physicality between Aldis and Latimer here, which, I mean, if the idea is to build to a big singles match with them at the Hard Times pay-per-view in December, kind of felt like they were giving a lot away there. But, ended up breaking down at the end with everyone hitting each other with an offensive move. And that is when Camille ran down for a second time to try and help Strictly Business. Starts with her pulling Latimer into the ropes when Aldis had him in the cloverleaf, right in plain view of the referee, by the way. And Aldis ends up chasing her around ringside as she's blatantly running into the ring and physically making contact with Latimer. Again, plain view of the official. And even in the land of NWA, all officials are blind, deaf, and dumb, apparently. And it ends up leading to this totally ridiculous part at the end where Camille ends up accidentally taking out both Adonis and Latimer with spears. And again, this does not lead to a DQ, despite Camille making physical contact with the wrestlers in the match. And Trevor ends up hitting Adonis with a top rope bulldog, and the faces end up getting the W. It was a completely fucked up finish, and once Camille got involved, it should have been automatic grounds for a DQ, but what can you do? Aside from taking a quick glance at the wrestling rule book and learning what constitutes its grounds for disqualifications, like making physical contact with wrestlers in a match that you aren't involved with. Seems pretty rational to me. And the main event for the show was the cage match with Crimson taking on Jax Dane. And they actually played up a deal beforehand where Dane went up to the top of the stage to try and jump Crimson when he was coming out from behind the curtain, which I guess was something that Dane had done before. So when Crimson came out through the crowd and kickstarted the brawl around ringside, it at least made Crimson come off as a competent babyface and not a complete Nimrod. Once they got in the cage, the match itself was pretty solid. I think they got a little too heavy there with all the gimmickry by the end. First Dane popped Crimson in the head with something that he ended up concealing from the ref. Of course, Crimson ends up gigging. Not really sure why Dane needed to hide the gimmick in a cage match when it's normally no DQ. Well, that is if Vince Russo's not booking it. And, Dane spent a while working over Crimson's busted forehead. I kind of laughed at the spot where he ended up wiping the blood on the ref's shirt. I don't know why I thought that was funny, but I did. Of course, Crimson ends up making the big comeback at the end, hits Dane with a powerbomb out of the corner, threw Dane into the cage a few times, eventually went to pick up the chair, but Dane ends up running at him and basically charging headfirst into the chair when he tried for the spear, which I actually kind of thought was a clever spot that I think both guys could have milked more. But the big finish here was Dane throwing the powder substance in Crimson's face, which honestly just made Crimson look like an idiot considering that he was looking right at Dane before he got powdered. And he could clearly see this giant white puff of dust on the mat. And I'm not really sure what he was expecting. So Crimson's blinded momentarily, and that is when Dane whips out a bottle of rubbing alcohol and ends up whipping it into Crimson's face, which was already bloody, by the way. And if you've ever tried to heal up an open wound with rubbing alcohol or peroxide, stings like a bitch, let me tell you. And Crimson's starting to his feet. Dane ends up decking him with a clothesline and put him away that way. I definitely dug the finish of the match, and Dane going over was kind of predictable when you factor in that he's probably next in line for a world title shot after the Pope. But there was a lot of good stuff here, especially for a cage match, which, I mean, traditionally I've been a big advocate of cage matches, although I can't really tell you the last time off the top of my head I have seen something resembling a great professional wrestling cage match. And no, you can take the Lucha Bros Beta Bucks cage match from that All Out show or whatever it was and shove it up your ass. I said professional wrestling cage match, not no-cell gymnastic tumbling cage match. Overall, though, I enjoyed the show. Main event was good. Tag match, albeit kind of overbooked with the Camille stuff at the end. It was a lot of fun. And the women's match was perfectly fine. The commentary was atrocious, and I implore anyone in NWA management within the sound of my voice that is listening, for the love of God, keep Austin Idol off of the commentary team in the future, please. I will take Velvet as a color commentator any day of the week over Austin Idol. And it'll be interesting, too, to see where they go as they build things up for the December pay-per-view in the next few weeks. I think a lot of the card seems like it's in place right now, but, if that show is going to be something on par with what they did with the NWA 73 event over the summer, I think they're headed in a pretty good direction for that. Anyway, I think I've done enough wrestle talk for today. Only really covered 2 shows, but I think we covered a lot of material. I watched a lot of wrestling this weekend, and honestly, I'm pretty match fatigued right about now. Generally, though, it was a good weekend of wrestling. I can tell you for certain that whatever period we're in right now, this sort of post-pandemic era of wrestling, it's definitely brought a new life and sort of a rebirth of energy for me as a fan that I wasn't really feeling for the last year or so. The re-edition of the crowds and going live again, the AEW roster restructure in the last few months with the acquisitions of guys like Punk and Danielson, NWA coming back into the fold in a big capacity. There's a reason I've been more consistent this go around with getting back into the swing of talking about wrestling. The fall off of NXT has kind of been a big bust for me, but, replacing it with some of the more retro content and getting back to relive some of my childhood with some of those territory shows, it's definitely been a breath of fresh air. And like I said, while AEW has a lot of problems that they still need to address as a company, they have made a lot of drastic improvements in the last couple years. And I am cautiously optimistic with where they could end up in the next 2 or 3 years if they stick the course, take things seriously as a company, and keep trying to grow their audience. The TV ratings for them have been a little bit wonky lately, but hopefully some of the buzz about this fallout from the Full Gear pay-per-view is going to bring some new life to the TV shows in the coming weeks. So I could definitely see a couple ratings bumps, at least as they lead into the holidays. Guys, if you want to stay posted here on the FSWR channel each Monday and Friday, make sure you smash that subscribe button, like the video, and leave a comment down below to share your feedback on both or either of these shows. Let me know where you guys stood with the Full Gear pay-per-view, favorite match, favorite moment, least favorite match, hits, misses, that whole deal. It'd be great to hear more feedback from people to see where they fall on the spectrum of that show, because I think the general consensus is that it was an overall great pay-per-view, but there are still some of those AEW haters out there that don't give them the time of day. So for the people that try to call things straight down the middle like I do and try to be as fair and impartial as possible, be kind of interesting to hear where you guys fall with everything. I will be back this coming Friday for the AEW Dynamite review, as well as the next installment of our retro review series of NWA WCW and World Class Championship Wrestling. Definitely come check out the show on Friday. Should be a good one. Until then, all, take care. Peace out.